It was supposed to be just another late-night segment, a celebrity guest, a couple of edgy jokes, maybe a jab or two at politics to keep the Twitter crowd entertained, but no one in the studio, not the host, not the audience, not even the stage crew, was prepared for what Robert De Niro, seated across from host David Lyle with the easy smugness of a man adored for decades, was about to unleash live on air. The moment was slow building, like a fuse burning under velvet. Lyle set up a softball about America's cultural divide, and De Niro leaned in with that narrowed squint he'd perfected over 1,000 scenes. Only this time it wasn't a line, it was real venom. "Trump," he said, voice steady and eyes sharp, "is the dumbest man to ever set foot in the Oval Office. Period." The crowd gave a few uncertain chuckles, assuming sarcasm, but when De Niro's face didn't change, when he followed it up with, "He's a grubby reel, a state hustler, a third-rate playboy, a tyrant in a cheap suit," the room stilled. The host blinked, lips twitching as if to redirect. But De Niro kept going, unfiltered, raw, personal, more like a prosecutor than an actor, and somewhere backstage, watching it all unfold on a monitor while a makeup artist hovered awkwardly. Nearby, Vice President JD Vance froze, his jaw tightening with each insult. He wasn't supposed to be on yet. His interview was after, a quick 10-minute follow-up about the administration's recent trade moves, but the man being shredded on national television wasn't just his president. It was the man who gave him a voice, a purpose, a cause. And Vance could feel something rising in him, not rage, but conviction. Back on stage, De Niro slammed his palm on the desk, calling Trump a disgrace, a joke, and demanding he resign. And that's when JD Vance walked out early, uninvited, calm but direct, stepping into the lights like a man crossing a line he could never uncross. The host stammered, reaching out with a confused smile. "Mr. Vice President, we were just, But Vance lifted a hand politely. "No need to stop. I just couldn't listen to this and wait my turn." The audience turned, buzzing. De Niro scoffed. "Oh, look, the enabler's here. Gonna defend your boss, huh?" And the room tensed, the temperature dropping. Vance didn't blink. "I used to admire you, Mr. De Niro. My dad and I watched The Godfather Part 2 in our old trailer when I was a kid. You weren't just an actor. You were something bigger, a symbol. And now you're up here trading that for applause from people who already forgot what you used to mean." The studio hushed. The host looked caught between panic and fascination. But Vance went on. "You're not angry because Trump's dumb. You're angry because he succeeded without asking for Hollywood's permission. He didn't come to you. He didn't grovel. He just won, and kept winning, without needing to be liked by people like you." De Niro leaned back, arms crossed, trying to smirk. But the smirk was brittle now, less sure, and Vance stepped closer, lowering his voice but sharpening the tone. "You made your fortune playing tough guys, but when a real fighter stood up to the machine, the media, the global elite, the bureaucrats who turned small towns like mine into graveyards, you mocked him. Why? Because he wasn't elegant enough? Because he didn't use the right words?" The crowd was shifting, unsure whether to clap or stay silent, sensing something more than politics was happening. Vance continued, "You want to talk about disgrace? Try walking through a steel town where every third house is boarded up. Try looking in the eyes of a mom who lost her son to fentanyl, trafficked in under open border policies you cheer for. You talk about character? Trump's called those moms. I've seen him cry with them. Not perform, not tweet, just cry." De Niro started to open his mouth, but the words didn't come fast enough. Vance pushed on, slower now, deliberate. "You've got a right to your opinion. But when you sit here, on this stage, and call the only man who's fought for the forgotten a tyrant, I'm going to use my right to respond, because you don't get to do this unchallenged anymore." Someone in the crowd clapped. Once, then again, more following, not a roar, but a ripple of realization. De Niro stood now, face flush with irritation. But Vance didn't back down. You don't speak for Ohio. You don't speak for the coal towns or the factory workers or the veterans with missing limbs who still salute the flag, even when the government forgets them. You speak for gated neighborhoods and cocktail parties and a film industry that doesn't know what a hard day's work feels like. The audience was still quiet, holding its breath. Vance looked directly at the camera. America's not perfect, but we're done being told by actors that loving it makes us backward. You called Trump a tyrant. I call him a man who remembered us when nobody else did. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't the president. Maybe it's the mirror. For the first time in decades, Robert De Niro, the man who once commanded screens and red carpets with ease, looked like he didn't know where to look. The host sat stunned, his cue cards limp in his hands. Vance nodded, turned to walk off, then stopped and added, voice soft but lethal, "You were a hero, Mr. De Niro, but tonight you played the villain." And with that, the stage fell silent, not a silence of confusion, but the kind that hangs. After a truth lands so hard it shifts the ground. Cameras kept rolling, phones lit up, and across the nation, from truck stops in Kansas to diners in Pennsylvania, people sat forward and whispered to no one in particular. "Did you see that?" Finally, someone said it. The clip went viral before the broadcast even ended, fractured into 1,000 cuts and edits, stitched with hashtags like "Give Vance own De Niro" and "EO Hollywood Humbled," spreading like a prairie fire through social media, newsrooms, and front porches. And within hours, the internet became a battlefield, not just of politics, but of identity, who we are, who we listen to, and who gets to speak for America anymore. JD Vance sat alone in his hotel room long past midnight, tie loosened, jacket draped on a chair, watching the aftermath swirl across screens as pundits scrambled to spin what they'd just witnessed. Was it a rebuke of celebrity arrogance or a dangerous populist moment? Had Vance defended democracy, or had he just made himself the next avatar of the Trump movement? But for Vance, it wasn't about theater. It was about memory. He closed his eyes and saw Middletown again, the flickering lights of a trailer park, the smell of rust in the air, the way his mother cried when they turned off the water again. He thought of how De Niro's words weren't just insults to Trump. They were insults to everyone who ever had to pick between rent and groceries. Meanwhile, De Niro's camp issued a statement by morning, crafted by a team of well-paid PR surgeons, calling Vance's response aggressively performative, accusing the vice president of dog-whistle populism and fascist-coded rhetoric. But it didn't land. It reeked of damage control. And worse, it sounded like it came from a place no longer in touch with the country it tried to lecture. On Capitol Hill, Democrats whispered about how Vance had just thrown gasoline on an already incendiary political year, while Republicans, especially the working-class faction, rallied behind him with a clarity they hadn't felt since 2016. Trump, watching from Mar-a-Lago in his trademark red tie and Diet Coke in hand, grinned like a man who just saw his apprentice steal the spotlight. He called Vance that morning, no aides, no notes, and said, "Kid, you didn't defend me. You defended them. That's what matters." And that was all he needed to say. Across the country, newsrooms flailed to catch up, framing it as a cultural flashpoint, a collision of working-class grit and elite vanity, while inside, De Niro's Manhattan apartment, the actor stared at his own reflection, rewatching the clip in a loop, trying to tell himself he hadn't lost. But something inside him knew otherwise. He paced, made calls, told his assistant to book a follow-up appearance on a rival show, this time with tighter talking points and no room for ambush. But the damage wasn't reputational, it was spiritual. Somewhere between Hollywood applause and political certainty, De Niro had become exactly what he used to parody, the man in the tower, barking orders at people he no longer understood. Meanwhile, Vance flew back to D.C., where he found himself now not just a vice president, but a lightning rod, a symbol, dangerous and magnetic, for a movement that was no longer just about Trump, but about survival, dignity, memory. In private briefings, party strategists warned him to tone it down, to play the game, to remember optics. But Vance wasn't interested in optics anymore. He was interested in a reckoning, and that reckoning was coming fast. Protesters gathered outside the Capitol. Some held signs saying, JD Vance, our voice. Others said, silence fascism before it speaks. The air grew electric with tension. Journalists tried to corner him in corridors with gotcha questions, but Vance kept answering in full sentences, with facts, with memory, with names of real people, not abstractions. Meanwhile, back in California, De Niro finally got his moment to respond. A carefully choreographed return on a late-night stage with mood lighting, sympathetic laughter, and a host who promised a safe space. I was speaking truth to power, De Niro said, and when the powerful respond with intimidation, that's fascism. The crowd clapped, almost on cue, but something had shifted, and he felt it, even as he delivered the line. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was obligatory, scripted, and online the video barely made a ripple. Comment sections filled with doubt, fatigue, and some outright mockery. Didn't this guy used to be cool? One user asked. And it was that, not Vance's words, not the headlines, but that comment that haunted De Niro the most, because it was true. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped listening. Meanwhile, Vance was doing something most politicians feared, telling the truth, raw and unspun. And the country, tired, aching, abandoned, was listening, closely. It began with a whisper. One staffer from a progressive PAC, then another from a corporate-funded media nonprofit. Then it rolled into a steady current. We need to destroy JD Vance before he becomes inevitable. The think pieces multiplied like cells in a petri dish, each one a little sharper, a little more panicked, each one trying to reduce him to a caricature, Trump's young Frankenstein, the hillbilly hypocrite, populist in a suit. But none of it stuck, because outside of Washington and away from Manhattan brownstones, people weren't reading Politico or sipping Syrah while doom-scrolling Twitter. They were in diners, in plant break rooms, in church basements, rewatching. That moment on the morning exchange where Vance took on De Niro, not with insults, but with memory, with pain, with truth. JD Vance had become something American politics hadn't seen in years, a threat not just to the left, but to the gated bipartisan consensus that had comfortably ruled the post-9/11 era, a consensus that wore red ties or blue scarves, but always sounded the same when the cameras turned off. He disrupted it with a single monologue, and now they wanted him punished for that. Hollywood tried first. De Niro was coaxed into an op-ed ghostwritten by 3 studio publicists and a Columbia professor, warning America that populism in a tailored suit is still a danger in disguise. But by the time it dropped, it barely made noise, because real danger had shown up somewhere else. Vance was scheduled to give a speech in Akron, a return to Ohio, his home turf. But the morning before, credible threats were intercepted by DHS. Militia chatter, they called it. White nationalist cells that feel emboldened. The psychs. Irony? Every name on the watch list was a former donor to De Niro's favored causes. When news leaked, the media twisted it into a smear. JD Vance inspires extremism. But the people saw through it. They knew what coordinated sabotage looked like. When Vance took the stage anyway, against Secret Service advice, the crowd met him like a prize fighter walking into the ring. No teleprompter, no scripted applause, just him, a mic, and 1,000 faces who looked like his mother, his neighbors, the boys who came back from Afghanistan with nothing but pills and debt. They say I'm dangerous, he began, voice steady. Not because I lie, but because I remember. You could hear a pin drop. I remember a country where we used to respect hard work, where we didn't mock welders and worship actors, where being loud didn't make you wise. And I remember being told I'd never make it out of my hometown unless I became someone else. Well, I didn't. I brought my hometown with me. And that scares them. It wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. And as the crowd roared, not with frenzy but with catharsis, somewhere in a Manhattan studio apartment, De Niro watched, glass of scotch untouched, and felt a silence he couldn't explain. It wasn't bitterness. It was recognition. He had become the thing he used to fight. The establishment. The gated monologue. He stared at his own reflection in the TV screen and whispered, "Maybe I should have listened." Meanwhile, in Washington, the panic grew. Vance's polling numbers were climbing, not just with Republicans, but independents, Latinos, even disillusioned Democrats who hadn't voted since the Obama era. He wasn't just running on Trump's coattails anymore. He was carving his own legend, word by word, county by county, and the machine didn't know how to stop him. Not with scandals, not with noise, not with De Niro, because JD Vance had done what no one thought possible. He turned a viral moment into a movement, not built on rage, but on recognition. Not on grievance, but on grief. And in that grief, millions found their voice. For once, they weren't being spoken for. They were being heard. And in the empty echo chambers of cable news green rooms and Hollywood fundraising dinners, the architects of the old America realized something too late. You can cancel a celebrity, you can bury a story, but you can't silence a memory that refuses to die. JD Vance wasn't just surviving the storm. He was the storm. And the next election wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be a reckoning.